Welcome to the Occupational Safety Leadership Podcast, episode number 285 with Dr. Drew Hinton. So, Drew has been a guest also on episode 8 and episode 59. And I've been trying to do everything I can to get him back to talk about more things. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day. And
Yeah.
today's topic, we're going to really try to focus on NFPA 70E. And for me, this is a really good topic because I've worked in modern places and it's been really easy to trace the power. We've also done a lot of like the design work up front and then installing equipment. So when you have that knowledge, it's really easy to do stuff. But when you're kind of walking in, now that can be hard. And
Right.
Drew, take it away, bud.
All right. Just like you alluded to, been on here before. I appreciate you having me on again. And this is one of the topics. I've got a kind of a passion for, just from previous experience. A lot of different companies, whether it's with Aero Safety or whether it's prior employers. There's a lot of misunderstanding on the 70E as far as what the intent of it is, and I think a lot of it just gets to the aspect of many companies and even employees themselves know that 70E is it's the gold standard of electrical safety, but the fact that it's not OSHA kind of steers some people, in a way steers some people away, is they don't want to purchase the standard itself, or whether it's the online subscription or the hard copy. They don't want to purchase that standard, so they kind of go off bits and pieces of it. And there's a lot more to it than just obviously just what OSHA mentions. You know, you and I know just as well as anybody else that's been in the safety profession for any amount of time that OSHA's always the bare minimum. But some of you all listening and watching may have seen, I guess, recently within the last year or so, where OSHA came out with a little bit of extra guidance on the arc flash topic. It was kind of just kind of out of the blue per se, but 70E is something that applies to really anybody that does any kind of electrical work. I think one of the big issues, I guess if you want to say issues, is that people think electrical work and they just only think of electricians and people wiring up stuff, and there's just so much more to it than that. It could be just maintenance folks that are just doing some seemingly basic stuff, that are needing to make sure they're taking the right risk mitigation methods and have the right PPE on, all that stuff. So there's a lot more to it than the typical person may see.
Yeah. So we had talked a little bit before the episode had started, and I always thought that they should um, that they should really stress a lot more of the hands-on things. I mean, I'm really good at passing the test, but give me a meter, and I got to kind of figure out the leads, and I got to go back and I
Yeah,
got to do things. So I would really like to see more of a hands-on, and it's really more of the trainer who's kind of saying, "Hey, this is going to be the standard for passing, and this is this,"
yep,
all that out there, and that's great, of course. But just a little more of hands-on. And PPE, I've never had to actually use it. Now, of course, I've worn it and all that kind of stuff. It's
yeah,
really hard to see. The gloves are difficult and bulky, and I mean anything that we can do not to put this stuff on, of course, too, is
yeah.
got to be it's got to be a plus for people.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff, even like you mentioned, down to the PPE portion, which any topic, whether it's electrical or fall protection or anything out there, obviously we should be going through that hierarchy controls and trying to do the elimination, which in this world of electrical safety, that's what they refer to as electrically safe work condition. We should be striving to get to that. But the process of doing that is technically energized work. So you still got to gear up and put on PPE at some point with that. But um, on the just the risk assessments overall, I mean, there's a lot of companies that don't even do that properly, whether it's electric shock risk assessment or the arc flash risk assessment. And that's one of the things, like you were mentioning, with trainers, right? Do they do these hands-on portions? And NFPA has some 70E standard has some guidance, and so if you've got this, people that have looked at the 70E standard, if you've got it like just a subscription to the NFPA link, obviously you can look at that kind of additional information that's typically contained within the 70E handbook. But they give a little bit of trainer information, but not a whole lot. It kind of leaves a lot of it up to the employer to figure out who they think is a qualified trainer to train that. But and even on the aspect of the type of training per se, um, they come out and say that it could be classroom, could be computer based training, could be in person, but it's all depending on what that employee, what the task they need to do. And so I completely agree with your statement of more hands on the better, because that's, if you look at the definition of a qualified person, it's kind of a two-sided definition. So one side is what a lot of safety people do, or a lot of safety companies will cover. That one side is that they've received that safety training to identify risk and mitigate the risk reduction methods. But the other side of being deemed a qualified person is that they've demonstrated the applicable knowledge and skills related to that, whatever that equipment is. And so that could be a knowledge thing. It could be, hey, we've did a written exam, depending on what the knowledge is. We could did a written exam and you demonstrated competency on that portion, or it could be like you said, we're taking a meter out, we're testing across the phases, we're getting actually getting a voltage reading on that, testing for absence of voltage. But then you throw in the other part you mentioned, throw in the PPE and try to do a voltage reading. It just adds another layer to it. Some people just always assume that, hey, the higher the better, the bigger the gloves and the higher the PPE rating, that maybe it's better. But in this aspect, it's not always that's the case, because you may have I get a class 00 glove that's rated for up to 500 volts, and it may be perfectly fine because all I'm working on is 480 or less. But they have the process or mentality of, oh, let's just go ahead and might as well go ahead and grab a class 2 or class 3 glove. Well, you're sacrificing dexterity with that. So if I
Yep.
need that fine, motor skills and fine, just very good dexterity, that might be a sacrifice I'm making just for for the sake of getting a bigger glove or more protection level if you don't necessarily need that.
Right, right. A lot of companies struggle with money too. And
Yeah.
somebody will say, well, we're going to be blowing through the double low gloves.
Yep.
We probably need something like really thick and really heavy. And if it's going to be a little bit overkill, well, that's okay. We test them every 6 months.
Yeah.
We just don't want to have any holes in this. We don't have any grease and all that. And then,
Right.
well, but now they just can't be. They just cannot be used then. Afterwards.
Yep. Yeah, and there's even on the gloves, there's a little bit of a variance from OSHA and NFPA 70E, as far as going without protectors. Which that's one thing. If you haven't, for those of you all listening and watching, if you haven't kept up with the most recent NFPA 70E standards published, they kind of took out the word of leather protectors and just says protectors now, because you can use
Mm,
other materials over top of your rubber insulating gloves, which most people still do that, but there are exceptions and allowances that you can go without the protectors. But there's a little bit of a difference in the situation as to what OSHA says you can go without the protectors versus what NFPA 70E says you can go without protectors. But I think the caveats or the downside of that people don't take into consideration is you got to look at, is that one single task worth it? And it may very well be if you can prove that you meet those criteria. But one of the things you got to do is you got to verify that there's no risk of cutting your rubber insulating gloves. There's no risk of tearing it, and you got to derate it. So if it's if it's a class 00, which is your lowest class, you got to derate it by 50%. All the other classes drop by one whole class. But after you're done with it, it's going to be sent back out to be tested again. So it's more like, was it worth that one single task just to use
yep.
those gloves without the protectors? Like I said, maybe there are tasks out there that somebody's ran into, and maybe that's a perfect situation. But you got to do that because these gloves aren't cheap by any means. Plus, downtime to send it out 2-3 weeks, whatever it is, to get them tested. So, absolutely,
Right, 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 right. I have run into a couple of folks who almost have to have double and triple the gloves, and just not for
yeah,
the testing and all that, but by the time that they sit down and maybe there's some chemicals in the workplace and different things, they're kind of like, well, did I get something on the gloves or not? There's a lot of things that look like water out there. Was it
yeah,
acid? Was it solvent? Was it just water? So
exactly,
there's a lot of things that you start to lose a little confidence out there
yep,
in the inside of those gloves. The one thing that 70E does a really good job on, I think, is sitting down and having that job brief.
hmm,
I really like that. I can see where maybe somebody could get a little complacent, like, oh, I've heard the same thing from the same person over and over and over. All right, I
right.
got it. I'm ready to go. You know.
Yeah. Yeah. The job briefing and the job safety planning are like you said, they're great aspects to the 7E of any electrical work that we're doing. And some of it, just depending on the task, maybe we do have, normally a company wise, we may already have a risk assessment procedure or a JSA or a JHA that covers, the majority, if not all of the items that we need to identify. And then we need to make sure we're covering that with, if it's especially more than one worker, make sure we're covering that with everybody to identify those risks. Another thing I like that when we teach these classes, we always tie into that same aspect is the annex in the back that talks about the human performance, and basically that, it flat out says that even the best people make mistakes, right? There's a lot of
Uh-huh.
precursors that it'll identify in the annex. It's a really great annex, talks about precursors that can lead to human errors and some things that we can do to mitigate those. Because whether it's multitasking, which is multitasking, not just multiple tasks within the same equipment, but just maybe go back and forth, which is a common occurrence even within whether you're a fixed facility maintenance person or electrician, whatever, or you're a third party going from different job site to job site, or juggling those different things. It could be I'm going from one job site to the next, or it could be I'm a fixed facility. I'm a maintenance employee at a private employer, and figure out what's wrong with one equipment, get a part on order. Well, now we're going to switch over to something else. Now we're juggling all these different things. Did I identify this? Did I, do this precautionary technique, whatever it may be? So there's a lot of human error aspects to it that I think, the NFPA 7E does a really good job of identifying, and then we need to cover in those job safety plannings and briefings beforehand.
Right. I really like the aspect also that you're sitting down and covering the contractors too. You
Yep.
know, and that's awesome if the person knows that they have to cover the contractors. But
Yeah.
I have but there are some field crews that will literally just go from site to site to site to site. They don't have a dedicated safety person at that site.
Right.
And I think that they're doing the very best they can, and they really think that they're doing things right and all that. But many times, especially at these older sites, guys are showing up like, well, they don't have any schematics, tracing some conduit. This has got to
Right.
be it. We isolate the power. Let's go back and test. So we can probably get a little bit more dangerous for folks who have to
Hmm.
travel and not in a fixed site, because you really start to know the site eventually. It
Yeah.
doesn't mean the hazards are not there. But especially if you were the one who ran that conduit and ran that wire, well, now you have that tribal knowledge, of course, too.
Yeah, absolutely. Contractors are a big, just topic that personally I don't think a lot of, I think there's a ton of companies out there that just don't address them, or they make the incorrect assumptions that, they give them XYZ certificates if they even do that, and say, okay, they're good. I've seen, was just having a discussion with a customer, probably 6 months ago down in Georgia. They brought people in and they were talking about contractors doing work in confined spaces. And they said, "Oh yeah, they've all got OSHA 10." I said, that's
Yeah,
great, but
awesome.
that is nothing for confined space entry, especially in the atmosphere that they were in. I said that they cover it. I said that's great, but it doesn't meet any training requirements, and I guarantee it wasn't anywhere in depth as it needs to be. So just because somebody sends you, oh, we took this electrical class, probably online. What did it cover? Did they, like you said, did they demonstrate any skills to actually know that you can, more or less do it and perform the skills yourselves?
Yeah. I like how you brought up the confined space, because if you have to go in and cut the power, you probably don't have lights. And if you don't have
Nope.
lights, well, then how can you see to get the work done and things too? So there's things that you have to kind of plan on, this extra flashlights, portable
Yep.
portable lights. Like, where do I run this power for the portable light? Because if I'm going to go back and isolate the power, well, now it's dark, you know.
Yeah, we have proper illumination. We see it a lot of new installs too, right? So they're new installation building, a distribution center, warehouse, and they may be in an area of the building that's underneath the bottom level of a racking system or something, and very poor lighting around there. And it's one thing to obviously blind reach, like physically, I can't see behind a panel or a contact or whatever it is, but to literally be in, like you said, an area that's just I can't see very well. It's just increasing the risk of yourself.
Right. Hey, so let's talk about how that you guys go about doing the NFPA training.
Yeah. So we always when we do these trainings, we always work with the customer to figure out what task are they going to be doing? Are they just basic? I'll say this kind of loosely, basic maintenance employees, or they do more of the mechanical stuff and they get a little bit into like the actually taking the panels apart and doing electrical work, or are they full blown electricians? Is it a mixture, or is it just, maybe it's a group of 70, you're a safety professionals that just want to learn that knowledge? And so we'll kind of cater it to them. But to the point of you that you brought up earlier, the skills demonstrations, that all depends on what they're needing, and we can only do as third party training providers, we can only do so much from our
Oh,
standpoint. So
right, right, right.
we'll go in, we'll do several hands on skills. It maybe all they need to do is they're wanting to get a better understanding, especially like a group of safety professionals. We're typically always going to have them do a risk assessment. We're going to take them out on the shop floor or wherever they're at. Look at a piece of equipment out there at their facility. We're going to have them, if they have an arc flash label, great, but I'm going to cover it up. I'm going to say, okay, I want you to go through as if this label wasn't here, figure out what PPE you need, figure out what your boundaries are going to be set up, figure out what incident energy levels that are going to be, we're going to be based on our selecting our PPE for, all those different things. And then we'll compare it. And usually one of the big eye openers that they see is, especially if they've already had an arc flash study done or incident energy analysis done, is I'll have them go through the PPE category method, which is a lot more conservative approach. If you haven't had an arc flash study done, it takes a lot more conservative approach. And so if they may do that, then it may say they got an arc flash boundary of 14 feet or something, and they look at the label that's accurate to that piece of equipment, it may say it's 3 feet. I'm like, that's a lot more accurate, costs money, obviously. But we're always going to have them do that. We're going to have them play around with their meters. We'll have them test their meters as well, because that's one thing I think that a lot of companies need to do more frequently is testing the accuracy of their multimeters, voltmeters, whichever ones they have.
Hmm.
So we'll have them do that. We'll have them put on the gloves, do all these different scenarios. We'll have them actually put on the equipment itself, inspect it. But sometimes we may have them go out there and actually, if they've we have some customers that even have staged demonstration equipment that's not hooked up to anything, and
Oh,
we can have
awesome.
them, we can have them open up panels with, obviously with the PPE on simulated, open up panels and go in there and do a specific task. That way they can do that. And then when we get done with it, whatever skills we have them do, we'll give the customer a skills, a competency checkoff list that says, here's the skills that they have successfully demonstrated, whether it's a knowledge, on a written exam or it's hands on, and we'll give that to them. And we always stress at one of the very first slides in our training is that we're not the ones, as third party providers, we're not the ones that say you are a qualified person. That's your employer that says that. And so we're going to give this information to your employer, and they're going to take that information and say, okay, this either A, this covers everything we need you to do, or B, we as the employer still need to take you out there and have you demonstrate XYZ skills to make sure you're qualified. And so, it's usually a thing that I think I've seen a lot more people that are getting more involved with that, because we start to see people understanding that 70E is the go-to rather than just the OSHA minimum. But it's the concept of just that qualified is so specific to a topic or project or a piece of equipment. I may be qualified to go replace just a typical outlet in my house or something. I'm not qualified to go work on a 480 volt disconnect or a 600 volt class MCC or 4160 coming in, whatever it may be. It's all very specific. So if you haven't more or less been there, done that, and demonstrated the skills, you may not be qualified. It's not necessarily a cheap shot or at somebody's pride. Sometimes they just go, oh, I can do that. It's just, no, I have to see that to make sure it's not a liability on our company, right?
Yeah, 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 yeah. So I have heard folks say, so how come I can do this at my house, but I can't do it at work?
Yeah. all the time, right? Whether it's that, I just have a discussion with somebody the other day. One of our neighbors here at the office, they were putting like some spray paint cans in the trash can. I was like, oh, you can't do. Well, I do it all the time in my house. I'm like, you can't be doing all that stuff in the business's trash can. Like, it's got to be disposed of. It's like all this hazardous waste. I was like, you got to dispose of that stuff properly. But the same thing, like you said, well, I can do this at my house. I change switches out, and I've gotten shocked before. I'm like, don't tell me that.
Right, that's right, that's right, exactly. Yeah, exactly, exactly. Yeah, But so getting back over to everything. For me, I just don't have that experience of having the older plants. I've always had the newer stuff, so it's really
Yep.
been very simple for me to go back and integrate. I gotta suspect that if you're coming to a legacy plant, it was built in the 40s or 50s when they did it, they did a lot of things live.
Yep.
That they just literally said we're going to do the very best we can. We're going to be safe. We're going to we depend on our people's competencies and that kind of stuff. Have you run into issues that they just could not make it electrically safe, but had to get the work done?
Yeah, honest answer is plenty. There's plenty of companies out there that
Mhm.
had to get the work done, can't successfully de-energize it and put it in that electric safe work condition. Which the proper step would be to do a energized electrical work permit to get it
Right.
signed off management. But there's a lot of companies that don't do that. They'll say, okay, we can't get it down, and maybe it does meet one of the NFPA as well as OSHA, one of their justifications for doing live work. Maybe it doesn't. But there's a lot of companies out there that will justify it for whatever reason in their head. Maybe it's legitimate. Maybe we got, critical equipment. We don't want to shut off the, fire alarm system, or we got some kind of ventilation system in a chemical storage room that's going to, if we shut it down, it's going to start accumulating toxic fumes, or, kind of the textbook answer of, oh, we got an ICU and, all this life-saving equipment, things like that. But like I said, some companies are going to do the proper way of, we got live work and we're going to do an energized work permit and get management and safety and everybody else to sign off on it. And some people just kind of go with it and kind of more or less John Wayne it and so just kind of go from there. Uh, and there's a lot more. There's a lot of tasks that people don't really consider live, but actually are. And some of those still have, the exceptions to the permit. So, for example, like testing, troubleshooting, and voltage measuring, it's still considered live work. You're still putting your equipment on a live
Mhm.
piece of equipment. Now, if you go by 70E, that is one of those exceptions or exemptions to a energized work permit where you can, yes, it is live work, but you, for 70E, don't have to get a energized electrical work permit completed. Now we've still got I know a couple of customers offhand that still do it anyways, and there's pros and cons to it, but I like the reasoning behind it. It's kind of a, yeah, we know 70E says you can do it without one, but we're going to go ahead and do it just more or less to keep you in your lane, right? So we're going to say, yes, we're going to authorize you to go in there and do, take a voltage reading, whatever it is. So that means that's all we're saying you can do. If you're in there, you see something's loose or something, we're not authorizing you to tighten that up. As seemingly as a task, small task as it is,
Right.
you're interacting with a different way, might pose a different arc flash hazard, might need to do different types of PPE, all things to change on that. So I've seen, like I said, some companies say, yeah, what NFPA 7E does allow you an exemption to not do this, but we're going to do it anyway, like I said, to kind of keep you in your lane and make sure that you know the only task you're allowed to do.
Right, 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 right. I really like that permit system. When it first
Yeah.
came out, like a really super long time ago, I was like,
Yep.
oh no, another form, something else,
just
else to
another one for
do,
our guys to fill out, right?
And it only took a little bit of time for me to kind of like come around. Like, okay, I kind of understand the methods here. I kind of understand the whole pre-task, and we're going to do this, and we're going to be smart, and we're going to plan. And
Yep.
then you can also say you are only going to do the following tasks,
Right.
too, because you're right. I bet you that people get in there like, oh, I bet you I can just fix this.
Yep.
I'll just be real careful. And I don't think it's from malice. I really think they're trying to do the best job they can, but it's not safe, of course.
Yeah. Or it's a time thing. Oh, it's going to take me longer to go tell such and such than it is to for me to just fix it while I'm in here, right?
Yeah, yeah, yes, yes,
Yep.
yes. I have been able to come up with a couple of alternate things to it, and of course, it has not been accepted in a very well way. That if you say, well, we have to shut down the whole panel, we need everybody in at 5, so we can do this in half an hour to really be back up by 6:30 or 7 to kind of really
Right.
get things going again. So someone's like, so I got to show up at 5 and not 7 now to get the
Yeah.
stuff done. You're like, well,
Exactly.
yep, yep. Yep,
Yep.
exactly.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And some companies can, they can manage that, or maybe they have an upcoming shutdown or turnaround project where they can just, okay, we'll just wait 2 weeks to our, Christmas shutdown project that we got coming up, and we'll just do it while it's already down. But yeah, some companies it is a struggle to do that. You get some grumbling from the folks on the floor. I got to come in 2 hours early. What?
right, 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 right. Well, there's typically a little bit of overtime involved, and that
Yep.
kind of helps to smooth things out. When you say, well, it's not going to be held against you because we still want you to work from 7 o'clock on. You're just
Right.
going to come in those 2 hours early, and so there's ways to smooth things out, of course,
Yeah.
out there.
Money talks sometimes.
So, money is a very good motivator,
Right.
So
Right.
yes, yes, exactly, exactly. So is there anything we haven't covered in 70E for today's talk because literally we could talk for the whole 8 hours. So there's no way we could talk for the whole eight
Yeah,
hours. But
exactly.
is there anything that you want to leave the audience with on
Um,
70E here?
yeah, I would just really stress that that going back to that definition of qualified person is just because somebody does have maybe they're a master electrician, but maybe they haven't dealt with that specific piece of equipment at your site, right? So
Yep.
just because they have all those credentials doesn't mean they're necessarily qualified. They could be 30 years on the job, like I said, master electrician, but haven't dealt with that piece of equipment at your site. They're not qualified because they haven't demonstrated those skills or knowledge. So really go through, and I'll encourage employers to go through and figure out what task and projects, equipment that everybody's working on, and figure out who is actually qualified, who has demonstrated those skills or knowledge, whether it's in-house or maybe they went to a manufacturer, the equipment manufacturer, and took a training there, whatever it may be. But really look at that to make sure that the folks that are doing the work are actually qualified. That we're not posing a risk, and if they're not, let's get them that way.
Right. And with that, Drew, I think we're at a pretty good stopping point for today's
Yeah,
episode.
absolutely.
Could you let folks know how to reach out and find you for more help on this topic?
Yeah, sure. You can always find us on social media. We're on LinkedIn and Facebook, and as well as we post some videos on TikTok every now and then. But feel free to visit us. Our website's aerosafetyus.com. It's got all of our contact phone number, contact forms, all that stuff. We'll be glad to, if it's just a random question or if we can help you out with training or any projects, we'll be glad to help out.
Fantastic, Drew.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much. And with
Absolutely.
that, episode 285 is complete with Dr. Drew Hinton. Everybody, thank you so much and have a safe day.